Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here and welcome to my guide to Eden's Promise Umbra on the Savage difficulty. This fight is broken up into several phases, so please use the timestamps in the description of the video to find anything specific. Before pulling the boss, we'll need a few positions. We assign tanks north and south, healers east and west, and a DPS in each intercardinal. We also ensure that each tank or healer is paired with an adjacent DPS for a split damage mechanic later in the fight. Finally, split the party into 2 light parties of 1 tank, 1 healer, and 2 DPS each. We'll cover when you need this later. Phase 1 is just a showcase of Cloud of Darkness's basic mechanics. Ground Raising Particle Beam is just room-wide damage, so handle that as usual. Devouring Dark is a tank swap into a buster. It will put a magic vulnerability on the main tank when the cast bar finishes, before shortly after firing a laser at whoever the current tank is. You can simply tank invuln this or do a tank swap and have the new tank use a cooldown on the damage. Just remember not to clip anyone else with that line AoE. Between those 2 attacks will be Art of Darkness. This attack has many different effects depending on the animation that Cloud of Darkness is using during the cast bar. For the first part, if Cloud of Darkness's tentacles are glowing, she will fire 4 split damage AoEs, 1 at each of the DPS. Simply pair up with a tank or healer like we described at the start of the fight. If she glows around her body, she will do a line AoE at each player, and for this, we use those spread positions we assigned. After running through each of those attacks will come Obscure Woods. This does massive room-wide damage, so extra mitigation for this one for sure. It also changes the arena and pushes you into Phase 2. Please note that of all the strategies I expect to evolve after the first couple of weeks, all of Obscure Woods is at the top of the list. Please be willing to learn newer stuff as time goes on after you watch this video. The phase will start with Flood of Obscurity. This attack knocks back when the cast finishes, and I highly advise using knockback resistance here. That is because after the knockback, each player will have a seed drop a small AoE on top of them. You'll want to spread these out around the intercardinal sides of the room, just a few steps away from the boss herself. This leaves open spaces at each of the cardinals for the remaining mechanics. Mind you, again, I expect this to change in the future as more optimal strategies come out. As soon as the seeds drop, Cloud of Darkness will cast Rejuvenating Balm. This targets roots on opposite sides of the room that will explode in giant AoEs. Fortunately, the spaces perpendicular to these roots will be safe from these explosions. However, those seeds you just dropped before will also tether to the nearest player after a few seconds, actually determining their current target only a couple of seconds after they drop. And finally, each DPS will tether to either a tank or a healer. These tethers are broken by moving away a set distance from the tethered target, with the distance scaling up the longer the tethers are initially. If you do not break them, you will be pulled into the seeds and likely killed. The execution is fairly simple. You stack up the tanks and healers on one side of the boss and all the DPS on the other. This will cause them to get tethered to nearby seeds, and after the tethers appear, both groups just run through the boss to the other side to break both tethers in an instant. The only confusion for this first Obscure Woods is which way to stack, since Rejuvenating Balm can target either sets of opposing cardinal roots. We just prioritize the tanks and the healers to start north or east, while the DPS prioritize south and west. Either way, the mechanic executes smoothly. Just make sure to get to those stack points quickly, as the seeds determine their tethered target very quick. You don't want to stop and finish a cast, so a little bit less caster friendly on this strategy. After the tethers are broken and Rejuvenating Balm's AoE explodes, you'll be subject to one of 2 mechanics: Anti-Air Phaser Unlimited or Wide Angle Phaser Unlimited. First, we'll discuss Anti-Air. During the cast, you'll see the boss's tentacles tethered to a side of the room. At the end of the cast bar, she will teleport to the edge that she is tethered to and do 3 back-to-back attacks. For Anti-Air, she'll first do a large point-blank AoE, just have to make sure no one's too close to the boss here. For our positioning, we put a healer and 2 DPS on either side of the boss as Anti-Air is actually casting. The tanks are on the same sides, but a good distance away from the rest of the party for the second attack from Anti-Air. The second attack will do a large circular tank buster on the 2 tanks, so that's why they're standing away from the group, but also standing away from each other. Make sure you pop a cooldown on this. The healers will also get a split damage AoE that's also a circle, which is why you want those 2 DPS hanging out with them during this. Just a little bit of mitigation on the 3 should be fine. Once both of those sets of AoEs go off, the boss will do a large conal AoE through the center of the room. The tanks just need to get to the flanks to avoid this, preferably saving a gap closer for it, and you're all set. The other phaser is Wide Angle Phaser Unlimited. This basically reverses the first and third AoEs from Anti-Air, so this one will start with that large conal AoE and end with the point blank AoE. The difference is really in the second attack. Now the second attack for wide angle is still 2 split damage AoEs on the healers and 2 tank busters on the tanks, but all of those are now conal AoEs that come from the boss. For this, we have each assigned light party just go to each flank of the boss to dodge the initial AoE, and then once that AoE goes out, the tanks step out towards the middle of the room to eat the tank buster while the other 3 people stack on each of the flanks. Once all those AoEs go off, then just get away from the boss's point blank AoE. Both of these are pretty simple, but again, with our seed placement, I do expect that some strategies and placements for this will change in the party finder in the coming weeks. Now, after whichever of those phasers goes off, you want to drag the boss back to the center of the room. There will be a ground-raising particle beam before the second Art of Darkness. This attack performs 2 back-to-back Art of Darkness mechanics, with the boss showing them to you one at a time. The first attack will show a single tentacle glowing, designating a half-room AoE that you'll need to avoid. The second will either be stacked pairs like you did in Phase 1, or the split damage line AoEs from Phase 1. So watch the animations of the boss and dodge accordingly. That's the only advice I can really give. After that, the boss will do whichever phaser she didn't do the first time. So if you got wide angle the first time, she'll do anti-air the second time, and vice versa. Ain't nothing to it but to do it. Once the second phaser is done, you'll need to do a Devouring Dark before the boss will cast Empty Plane. Like Obscure Woods, this does massive damage and changes the arena again, moving us into Phase 3. The arena is now broken up into several tiles along the floor. At first, they are inactive, but upon the boss using Flood of Emptiness, everything begins to kick off. This attack disables 3 tiles in each corner of the room, while also making the center tile where the boss is located lethal to the touch. Additionally, the tiles on the floor will now collapse if a player stands on them too long, or instantly collapse if more than one player stands on them simultaneously. Finally, players will get a debuff, Curse of Darkness. When it expires, each player will do a conal AoE in the direction they are facing. Simply face towards the outside of the arena, away from your allies. Oh, and for that arena breaking thing, it also disables jumps. For starting positions, we put the ranged and healers at the points at each cardinal direction, with the tanks and melees right in front of them like you see with me in particular here. This is to intercept the first mechanic, Hyper Cloud Concentration. This will summon a cloud at each cardinal side of the room, which quickly floats to the center. If one reaches the center, it gives the boss a stacking damage buff. They can be slowed just by standing directly between them and the boss in the center. This will be on the ranged and the healers to do while they are destroying the clouds. The difficult part of this strategy is that it lies largely on the ranged and oddly enough the healers to do most of the DPS to the clouds. The movement required leaves very little room for tanks or melees to help, outside of some laughable ranged attacks or saving some longer range burst tools, maybe even letting the cloud float a little bit closer before you actually start to slow it down. Now there is a movement that lets you get melees on these clouds, but the amount of movement required to get them back to the boss leaves just larger room for failure, especially with random players in the party finder. We'll see if people embrace putting melees near the clouds, or perhaps letting them speed up for a brief second to get closer to the melees. The good news is that even if a cloud reaches the boss, it's actually not a wipe. Just have to be ready for the increase in damage, which will get easier to deal with as weeks go on. Ideally, you want to destroy the clouds around the time Curse of Darkness wears off, roughly 8 seconds of time. If not, you probably have a GCD or longer before killing them can get kinda awkward as you start doing movement for the next mechanic. Right after Curse of Darkness wears off will be a full perimeter particle beam, which is a donut AoE. The range and the healers will need to be let into the inner tiles to survive this. Fortunately, this is actually really simple. Have all the tanks and melee rotate 1 square over clockwise and let the range and healers in. Just make sure everyone's a bit closer to the boss's hitbox here, as the donut still kind of hits the outer edge of all those inner tiles. After the donut AoE goes off, wait a couple of GCDs before resetting back to the same exact tiles. Next will be a half-room Art of Darkness. The tanks on the north and south sides of the room need to move over a square to make space for the remaining players to move in. The melee on the unsafe side takes 1 square that's open, and the faraway healer takes the other. Once you're all in the correct squares, make sure you're actually on the side of the room that Art of Darkness isn't hitting, because the tiles are going to be split 50-50 here. Once the half-room AoE goes off, have the healer that's supposed to be far away go to their tile first, followed by the melee placed in front of them. Before the north and south tanks move back though, let the ranged DPS quickly step in and out to reset the timer on the outer tile. Once everyone is back in position, it will either be a spread out or split damage pair Art of Darkness. If it's pairs again, just have each pair of players stand close to each other without stepping into each other's tiles. You should just be right front and back to each other. If it's the spread out Art of Darkness, just have the tanks and melee move over one tile clockwise and let the range and healers step in to both reset their tile and spread out properly. There's even another position you can do that doesn't require that much movement, but you're going to have to do the movement to reset the tiles anyway. Once that's done, everyone reset to their default spots and wait for the phase to end. Little bit of advice if you do die in this phase, apparently if you have resurrection immunity, you will actually not count as wait for the tiles. So as long as you wait to attack, you can get back to your tile and safely continue the mechanic where you left off. This is of course assuming that not enough people die to completely throw the fight. So speaking of phase transitions, the next mechanic is going to be Deluge of Darkness. Once it finishes casting, the arena will be reset to normal, but everyone's going to take massive damage. Mitigation of course. Just a few more mechanics and you're through most of the fight. The first mechanic here is Summon. This, well, summons 2 clones around the outer edge of the arena. They will copy the boss's next half-room Art of Darkness, narrowing off a safe spot to roughly 1/8 the size of the room. So look at which direction the boss is cleaving, then look at the clones, and just determine what's left. The remaining safe area looks approximately like you see on the screen here. If someone is confident in your party, you can also just mark them and use them as a beacon of safety. After another Devouring Dark is the third Art of Darkness. Similar to the second art, this one just does 3 back-to-back attacks. It's always a half-room AoE, followed by either a spread out or split damage Art of Darkness, followed by the opposite half-room AoE. The movement here is simple, you just have to make sure you're paying attention to the animations on the boss, and it shouldn't be a problem. After the third art will be Obscure Woods again. It's identical to the original mostly, with just some slight remixes. The Flood of Obscurity will still knock back, it'll still drop seeds, and you'll still have the same types of tethers as before. Instead of Rejuvenating Balm though, the boss will use Particle Concentration. This just places 8 meteor markers around the room and you need 1 person in each before the meteor hits. We do the exact same movement as the first Flood of Obscurity here, but each player just breaks off and grabs their own meteor. Tanks and melees take the near meteors and ranged and healers take the farther ones, like you see in the video. It's really simple. There will be either an anti-air or wide angle phaser unlimited here again, after which you should drag the boss center. After another ground racing particle beam will be Rejuvenating Balm plus second Art of Darkness. Now when players are dodging Rejuvenating Balm, they should dodge it in the spot that's closest relative to where they do their pairs or their spread out positions from earlier. Once the half-room AoE from the second art goes off, you quickly need to either get to your spread spots or your pairs in order to split the damage. Now with our seed placement, this actually was probably more tricky than it needed to be. As you can see, it's kind of squished when I tried to dodge it in the footage. So this is another spot I think can actually use some improvement. One thing is that if you get pairs, your healers and range DPS can stay out, while your melees and tanks can move in, and you don't have to worry about getting to the exact spot that you've actually assigned. For the spreads, as long as you make sure you're not stacked on top of one another, that shouldn't be a problem either. So don't take what you see here as gospel. Feel free to experiment with it in the Party Finder or accept alternate ideas or strategies to make it easier. I just hope you have an idea of how it works coming out of this video. Once that's done, there'll be another Devouring Dark before the final Empty Plane. This phase works pretty much exactly like the first one. It'll just last longer with more Arts of Darkness to adjust for and some back-to-back AoEs before the Enrage. If you keep it cool and handle it as you did before, you're all set. The movement shouldn't be any different. And with that, that's going to be a wrap for my guide to E9 Savage. Now, I mentioned this several times throughout the video, but I really want to make a mention of it here. I've been hesitant to release guides during week 1 and week 2 because the strategies are quite frankly less efficient and just get memed on in the Party Finder as weeks and weeks go on. They hopefully will give you an idea of how the fight works, but I deeply encourage people to be willing to learn new things as the Party Finder goes on. Most of the time, it's not just people greeting. It's something that may actually get more uptime, but may also be easier as weeks and weeks go on. This is the last major Savage tier, so please, I'm begging you, don't take this video for gospel. I don't intend it that way, I never have. And I say that knowing full well that you probably didn't make it this far in the video and that this is all going to waste. So with that, be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share. And I will see all of you in the next video guide, whatever it may be on the channel. Until next time, take care.